So let's talk about the High Renaissance in Northern Europe. In the beginning of the Renaissance in Northern Europe, we had a major power established through Flanders and Burgundy. If you remember right, those were the four dukes of Burgundy. They were Charles the Bold, Richard the Lion-Hearted, and there were two others. Those main powers were created through alliances of marriage through Burgundy and the Netherlands, or Flanders to be exact. So my point is that Burgundy dissolves. It dissolves, and France, Italy, and Spain absorb them. Now, when I say Italy, actually what I mean is a Holy Roman Empire. This makes the Holy Roman Empire, France, and Spain stronger. Spain takes over as the dominant power. They do this through expansion of territory and through marital alliances. Art and architecture is used as propaganda to flaunt the wealth of the monarchy and to maintain social control. Artists start selling their art independently. This is made possible primarily by the invention of the printing press that happened in early Northern Renaissance and through printmaking in general. But the artist is still dependent on the monarchy and the church for major commissions. So the Protestant Reformation and the Catholic Counter-Reformation wage on. Ultimately, it splits the church into two main churches, the Catholic Church and the Protestant Church. But it fuels a very serious war that lasts for 100 years. And during this war, we see that the monarchy is able to intertwine their power through the war and use religion as social control. Artists are on the move. They're usually chasing large commissions, and they often move for religious freedom or to escape the war. Okay, so we are moving on to a new time period or a new art historical era. We are moving actually from Italy to Western Europe, and we're going to actually talk about something that's really, really important. I know that it was in the PowerPoints last week, but I want to be sure that you fully understand what the Protestant Reformation was. So there was this guy, and his name was Martin Luther, and he took a trip to Germany. And when he took a trip to Italy from Germany. And when he took this trip to Italy, he sees that the Pope is doing some unorthodox things in order to raise money. And he's doing some things that he feels are not biblical. For one thing, the Pope are having children out of wedlock. And they're practicing something called nepotism, which means they're appointing their relatives to important positions within the papacy. They've also are doing something called selling indulgences. The indulgences are small pieces of paper that are used to buy time off of heaven or out of purgatory, so that the owner of the indulgence gets to heaven more quickly. This is important because Martin Luther sees all these things and gets really upset. And he goes back to Germany and he nails a thesis, 95 thesis rules to the church door, and says that until these things are done, he will in no way, shape, or form step foot again in a church. And so there's a new movement in religion launched called the Protestant Reformation. As soon as the Protestant Reformation happens, the Catholics turn around and launch a counter Reformation. But let's look at works of art during the Protestant Reformation. Something that you need to know about the works of art in the Protestant Reformation is that they tend to not include figures. So here's the table that I promised you in the last unit. So each lecture now will have one of these tables for it, and I'll kind of walk you through the table, and then we'll talk about sort of what's going on in art through the table. So in art, proverbs are often depicted, especially when you're looking at Hieronymus Bosch's work, when you're looking at work by Bruegel. Any art that has a moralizing message is using those proverbs. Why? Because the Protestant church has banned art altogether. And they have to have a way to have moralizing messages. And so they use society's moralizing messages to create subject matter to remind them to be good people. Paintings tend to have an oddity about them. They have some grotesque things. They're being pictured in sort of obscure ways. The Northern Europeans have these strange sayings that go along with their society. And because of those sayings, a lot of times the painters are actually painting those sayings. Now, we have them in our culture too. It's just we don't think anything about them. Like we say things like it's raining cats and dogs, or we say things like don't wear out your welcome. So in art, we are seeing lots of those moral sayings being painted because they've gotten rid of the moralizing images in the church. Peter Bruegel creates some really important calendar pages. Those calendar pages are important because they record life within the different social classes at the time of the Protestant Reformation. And we see depiction of goods being sold and business scenes. One of the things that you need to understand about art in this era is that the modern art market gets its roots from the Protestant Reformation. All of a sudden, the Protestant artist doesn't have a patron anymore other than for portraits for rich families. They have printmaking for patronage, but they really don't have a outlet or a major way of getting art to the masses because the main patron of art at this time is the church. So without the support of the church, all of a sudden art has to be for the masses. It no longer is for the court. It is for, they need the average everyday person to be able to afford and buy their art so that they can survive as artists and still stay in Northern Europe. Okay, so who are the artists we're looking at? Albrecht Dürer, Bosch, and Bruegel. We're looking at Altdorfer and Grunwald and Groen. Background information, believe it or not, people at this time think that the world is going to end. I know that that's kind of funny because we hear that all the time nowadays too, right? The world's ending. Well, they really did think that the world was going to end, and because of that, I think that the Protestant Reformation also had bigger significance in its meanings to the people at the time. I wanted to forewarn you that in this next section, you're going to have 2 slides after this that talk about 2 specific paintings. I have kept them in this overview section because I want you to see them as a reflection of what's going on in society in high Renaissance Northern Europe at this time. So this is a Protestant scene. It is Quentin Massey's The Money Changer and his wife. This scene is depicting a moralizing lesson for greed. The painting has subtle religious symbols and an intense study of domestic interiors and daily life. This type of art replaces art in churches to instruct faithfulness. This is a very old-fashioned painting. It's an indication of money in Antwerp. If you were in Antwerp and you lived in that time when you saw this painting, you would automatically know that this painting was an indication of money and the moral trappings of it. I will include in one of the Delve Deeper activities an activity for this painting. This painting is a fascinating painting in that it talks about how society is reflected in this painting. You see the money changer. He runs his own business, and his business is exchanging currency. You can see in this mirror up close to the picture plane the outside world being reflected in it. The wife, she's reading her book of hours. A book of hours is a collection of daily prayers. So she's being devout, and she is looking on to what her husband's doing. You can see behind them symbols of prosperous and moral handling of the money. This is Catherine von Hemissen. She's from Holland, and she actually paints for Holland, Belgium, and Luxembourg. What's happening is the Protestant merchant class and the peasants are seeking independence from Spain. Remember, I said at the beginning of this, Spain was the bigwig in control. There was an accumulation of wealth in the Netherlands, and so portraits increased in popularity. Portraits were a sign of wealth because you had to have money in order to be able to commission a portrait, but it was also the only way they had to record their lineage in the family. And so those generations after generations of people who carried on the legacy of the family was something that they really wanted to record. And so portraiture increased because the middle class becomes more and more wealthy. The self-portrait is the first known Northern European self-portrait by a woman. Here we see Catherine von Hemissen. She looks directly out at the viewer. That is unique because mostly at this time women were not allowed to look up at the world. They would veer their gaze down towards the floor. Looking one in the eye could appear aggressive, but here is a sign of confidence, and she presents herself to the world, or to the Northern European Western world, as an artist who is skilled. She is currently in the painting a portrait of herself. She's in the middle of her work, and she interrupts her work to look at us, the viewer. She holds brushes and a palette and a mahl stick. The mahl stick was used to balance on the frame of the painting. We always see paintings framed from this time period, and it's because the frame was an important tool within the painting. They would take a mahl stick, and balance it on the canvas so that the artist could rest their hand along the mahl stick as they painted, help to relax the body and get more fine detail within the painting. The mahl stick steadies the hand Unlike today, whenever you do a work of art like that, you had to build those muscles in by just painting and holding the brush up and having enough control to use those little tiny movements. So we don't tend to pre-frame our work, but they did in the Northern European Renaissance time as well as in the Italian Renaissance time, because it was a helpful tool. Catherine von Hemesen's father was Jan Sanders van Hemesen, and he was a well known painter. He trained her. Women had a hard time being part of art back then because unless they had a father who was an artist or a brother, sometimes an uncle, but most of the time, unless the family was a family of artists, women were not deemed as important enough to educate for them to start their own business as an artist. Here she's painting herself at the age of 20. She wears fancy clothing. She wears clothing that aligns her with the upper middle merchant class. And you can see the fine fabrics in which her dress boasts. They are made of velvet, and then the sleeves have this beautiful silk that sort of pinches out between the fabric of the seam of the sleeve.